get an idea of how many of you have already done any kind of religious interpreting. Okay, about half of you. All right, great, great. I know that I had asked Kate to see if there was any particular topics that you wanted me to cover in my presentation. And I don't know if you're currently doing any kind of work right now, or if you are, you have done it in the past. That's something that, you know, if you have a particular issue or how do I sign this, something like that, we can hold some of those until the end of the presentation. So formulate a couple things as you are sitting here, saying if there was something more specific about religious interpreting you had a question about, or if there's more a general topic, hopefully I'll be able to cover the kind of things that you're interested in. One of the things that I want to just preface is that most of the resources that I have available are in Christian interpreting. There are other resources that I'm going to show that also touch on other things, and so I want to just make sure that you know that the kind of things that we talk about today, as far as resources, tools, and whatnot, these are things that can be applied to other religions if you choose to interpret in those other religions, and if they let you interpret in those other religions, depending on what your background is. So think of this presentation as not just about a Christian setting, think about it as all religious settings, because I really believe that a lot of the principles that we talk about today can be applied to a lot of those different settings, and even other areas of religion. Just to let you know who I am, of course I'm Teresa Schmekel. I graduated from UWM's Interpreter Training Program a long time ago in 1996. And 2 years later, I received my first certification, my CI, and then I got my CT the year after. And shortly after I graduated from the program, I was actually Professional Interpreting Enterprise's very first employee. I was their first coordinator. So coordinator work was so good for me because I learned so much about all the different needs within the community, how to work with professionals, how to hire interpreters, what kind of information do interpreters need. And so it was a great transitional job for me. So think about that too as you're kind of graduating and trying to find your way. Where are you going to slide into a job? Say to yourself, you know, do I only have to be interpreting, or there's some other kind of quasi-interpreting jobs that will also help me develop? I really valued my time at PI as a coordinator, and then I went on to be a staff interpreter with them for 6 years before I left the company to have a family. When I graduated from the interpreter training program, though, I was hired as a single interpreter for a church where they had one deaf child, and that was all that was there. But they wanted to provide regular interpreting services so that they could grow what they wanted to see as a deaf ministry. The son's father was hearing, and he was the pastor. And so he was able to communicate directly with a lot of the congregants, and it worked out really good, and they grew to the point where they actually had their own deaf pastor, and they didn't need us anymore, which is really awesome. That's, of course, the ideal situation is when you have a deaf pastor shepherding their own congregation. That's where everything really happens. It really works. But unfortunately, there's not enough of them out there. So then they have to get interpreters. And my first experience, of course, is in that setting. And then I went on to work in the Catholic setting. I teamed a lot with Pam, working with her dad, and saw Christopher Pussman through his seminary. And then now I'm working with him as well. And so I work primarily, most of my religious interpreting is in the Catholic setting. I am not Catholic. But I do find the Catholic setting very challenging because it does deal with a lot of prose and text, a lot of ritual songs, and I believe that as a professional it's really challenged me in a lot of different ways, and I'm really appreciative of the opportunity. And they keep me really busy. We'll talk a little bit more about the interpreting opportunities a little bit later on. One of the things that I wanted to give you just an idea of where religious interpreting has been and where it has come today. A lot of times you hear deaf people talk about their experience growing up in church, especially if they're a little bit older. Deaf people would tell me about how they would just have to sit in church with their hearing parents, and what are some of the things that they would do. Has anybody ever heard deaf people talk about just not having access to church? And
they just zone out?
Just look around, just looking around, just counting the stained glass windows, watching the fan. Right. That was their religious interpreting experience. And so they had little to no access of what was going on. They couldn't participate in Sunday school because nobody had any kind of access for them there. They'd have to sit in church with their parents. Moms and dads didn't sign all that well, and so they're not going to be able to interpret what's going on, and they want to enjoy worship too. So by and large, deaf people, probably my age and older, um, probably did not have a lot of access to the church setting, like most of us did. So, so deaf people will actually talk about those years where they had to sit, in church very bored without any kind of access. Um, the church really didn't have at that time a really good idea of deaf community. Of course, you have to think about deafness and ASL as a very recently found culture and language. You think it's been around for a long time, but compared to other languages and cultures, it's just a brand new frontier for a lot of linguists and just the community in general. It's better now, but at that time, you're talking about in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and things like that, churches weren't really recognizing deaf people as a community and a culture that needed to have access. They were just those poor people who couldn't hear. So unfortunately, access was on the least of their minds. They just wanted to be benevolent to them. But that didn't necessarily translate to really understanding anything about the faith that they so desperately wanted them to have. So churches' prospective interpreters were, well, if you know a little sign language, you're good, right? So we had a lot of Susie signers, as I call them in church, doing their best and just really, really doing their best as far as interpreting. But unfortunately, by and large, those particular people who were signing in church really did not have either the language or the training to be able to interpret such complex concepts that we see in religious life. So again, what is the result of that? Deaf child, deaf person is sitting in church, and they're still not getting anything. And at that point, there's really not a lot of incentive for a church to do something different or better because there's nobody requiring them to do that. Deaf people have to suffer through this a lot back then. So they're not going to request for anything different. And you know what? They're just happy that somebody's there. And that's all they need. That's the best that they're going to get. And so they're not going to complain about it either, which is a very unfortunate situation, nor do we encourage that attitude or behavior today. So, of course, consequences is that even basic standard Bible stories that are even part of mainstream culture that people know, Daniel and the lion's den, Noah and the ark, and things like that, are all absent from their life and their growing up. Even if you choose not to affiliate with any kind of religion, you know those stories. Just because that's part of our mainstream culture, they didn't have access to any of those. And that's really important as professionals today to understand the kind of access that they didn't get, because it does influence our interpretation. We'll talk about that in a bit. And so the challenge, of course, is how do we, as professionals, advocate for appropriate access? And how do we also, and I don't like to use empower because empower is not an appropriate word, but how do we give and walk by as an ally with our deaf friends to give them the access that they need to their settings? If I do that, does it do anything?
The arrow.
Okay. The arrow. The arrow. The arrow.
See the
right.
little arrow right
This
there?
arrow or this arrow?
The top one.
The top one. Thank you. Okay, so things change. Things change in religious interpreting. I believe that one of the biggest significant things that really makes an impact on a religious setting and access to religious setting is the ADA. Even though that the ADA does not apply to religious settings or nonprofit organizations in its infancy, deaf people start to feel, hey, I can start asking for things. I can start asking for an interpreter for things. And they get used to it in their everyday settings where it's really required, and they become very emboldened to say, you know what, I'd like to have this in church too. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that churches are automatically going to understand the Americans with Disabilities Act, getting access, having to budget for interpreters. They still don't understand all of this. However, they start getting information on a regular basis saying, what is with this ADA and interpreters, and how come Susie isn't good enough? And they start really contemplating this, but still no real big changes. Already certification is passed, and now people are starting to get more certified in this particular time period. And it's recognized more widely. So now people are saying, what are your credentials? That's even more prevalent now that we have licensure, which is really important. But how licensure impacts religious interpreting, we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other thing that kind of is an interesting consequence is professional interpreters are getting certified, they're getting more professional, they're getting education, they're doing all these things, and all of a sudden, religious interpreters, who really are a lot of the pioneers of interpreting, because most of the interpreting done way back when, before we even had a professional organization, was in church. And so now people are getting skilled, they're getting training, there's places to go, and all of a sudden those religious interpreters are the poor cousins in the field. And religious interpreters like, but we've been here all along, and now nobody wants to do anything with it. So then there becomes this big disparity between the two skills that, again, churches really don't recognize, but it's still there. The other great advent is how deaf people become ministry leaders themselves. So now they're starting to understand, hey, maybe I don't need an interpreter all the time to get what I need. Maybe I can start looking into things on my own. And they start studying and they start wanting to go to college, because college has to have accessibility. So they start getting better education, and now all of a sudden we have deaf people who are really interested in becoming leaders within their own church. And that's when you start seeing churches making a big change and saying, you know what, we're going to have to do more than what we're doing as Susan Steiner just said. This, thank you. So, taking a look at that history, right, and taking a look at where deaf individuals have come throughout their lives, you know, more of them my generation. We have, of course, you know, some of the younger generation, like yourselves, who probably had a little bit more access, you know, to religious settings, but not as much as we have today, really. It's very, very new that we have churches really, really seeking out qualified interpreters and paying for them as well. But one of the things that is a barrier is there's just not enough of us out there. And when churches are looking to actually hire interpreters and whatnot, we still have professionals that are just not ready to take that step. They're just not ready to try it out because it's very foreign. It's really not any part of their education. It is. It only happens on days that they want to be with their family, and so giving up their Sunday for a church really isn't something that they're interested in. But they do find the concept of interpreting in a church overwhelming, believe it or not. Yet those interpreters were the poor cousins, you know, of all those years. And now all of a sudden professionals are being invited, come join this team. They pay well, let's do it. And they're still like, I don't know, I don't know if I want to do that. So these are the kind of things that, you know, that we want to start, you know, providing information and giving people the opportunity to understand what it is about this particular field that really is very exciting. One of the things that I like to illustrate is that you think about your body, right? You think about all the muscles that you have in your body. Is there any big workaholics? People like to really hit the gyms and anything like that? No? Okay. So I am allergic to it sometimes, but I know I have to get in shape, so I'm okay. But anyways, I like to run, that's about it. But there are muscles in our body that need support, right? There are muscles in our body that can grow with the right support, right? If I want to exercise and get this muscle really big, what's the other muscle I have to exercise? This one, exactly. If I want this muscle, right, to get big and get strong, I have to exercise my hamstrings, right? If I want my abdomen nice and flat, not that it is now. If I want this nice and flat, what do I have to exercise? My back, right? So every muscle that I want to see looking nice, right, I have to find another muscle to support it. And then I achieve what I want. And of course, I really believe that interpreting is very much like that. I think that sticking in just one niche is neither beneficial or healthy for an interpreter, because it only grows this part of the muscle, and then it's never even going to get as big as you want to, because you didn't use anything over here. And it's always going to have something missing. Whether it is that you're talking about education, and this is where we find a lot of interpreters falling through the cracks and unable to reach certification, is because they get a nice job that pays, right after graduation, and that's where they stay, because it's good money, right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it's steady, you get your summers off, and, you know, there's some other little jobs that come along with it, but by and large, you're paying off your bills, your student loans and everything, I get that. I mean, that's it. But you're working alone most of the time, and there's really no opportunity for growth, except for just doing what you're doing, which sometimes develops bad habits, which sometimes, you know, but you can do that in any of these. If you're only doing mental health interpreting, right, and you're not doing any medical interpreting, those two kind of support each other in a way. Performing arts, you know, performing arts is a great field if you want to do anything within a school, right? If you want to do even religious interpreting, you know, requires a lot of performance arts. When you're talking about post-secondary education, right, that when you're using more technical vocabulary at a higher level, that's going to maybe influence your ability to go into legal someday, because now you have a much expanded vocabulary repertoire. And so all these things, no matter what you do, are going to make you a better interpreter. I always like to make the illustration of pool playing. Does anybody play pool? We were just talking about it a second ago, right? Love the game, love the game. So in pool there are lots of different games.